Welcome into the College Football Power Hour. Happy Sunday, a special Sunday edition, Selection Day edition of the podcast. That's Jason Fitz. He is Adam Breneman. I am Caroline Fenton, and the picks are in. The College Football Playoff Committee made up their minds. Oregon, by no surprise, is the number one team in the country. Georgia gets the 2 seed, Boise State the 3, Arizona State the 4. There was a little bit of deliberation if Arizona State did enough in the Big 12 title game to leapfrog Boise State. That is not the case. Boise State will get the 3 seed. Arizona State, though, still gets a first round bye. Texas at the 5th seed, Penn State at 6, Notre Dame at 7, Ohio State at 8. That rounds out the next 4 teams that will host first round playoff games. The first ranked team that'll be on the road at number 9 is Tennessee, Indiana at 10. SMU gets in at 11 over Alabama. Kind of a controversial pick there. And Clemson gets in at 12 as the ACC champions. I'll just sort of open it up. Adam, initial thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think this system, for all that we talk about the negatives of it, boy, is this entertaining. I mean, watching the selection show was certainly fun. There's so much. I think we're all in agreement that the way we do rankings and seeding will have to change. I mean, just the explanation that Reese Davis has to do on the selection show is kind of crazy, where they show the ranking on the left and there's 2 numbers beside each team. It's kind of wild. For the most part, I think the committee got it right. There's 2 areas I have gripes with, and I'm sure you guys know where I'm going with this one. Number one is I believe Arizona State should have been the 3 seed over Boise State. For how Arizona State was playing this season, the fact that they won the Big 12, a Power 4 conference with a much tougher schedule than Boise State played, I believe Arizona State should have gotten that nod above Boise State. And everyone says, well, it doesn't matter. They both get first-round byes. It does matter, because the 3 seed plays in the Fiesta Bowl, which would essentially be a home game for Arizona State in the first round. Okay, so that's a big difference for ASU, having to now travel to a cold weather game in round 1 instead of playing in Arizona for their first round game, which is where Boise State will play. My second gripe, Fitz, is I believe Alabama should have made the field over SMU. I think what the committee has showed us, and the dangerous precedent you're setting, and I get that there's dangerous precedents both ways, right? The penalizing people for losing a conference title game, is that right? I'm not sure, but what I think the committee just did is show us that strength of schedule doesn't matter. And if you're SMU and you had a weak strength of schedule, 60th in the country versus Alabama's 16th strength of schedule, SMU lost to BYU at home, lost to Clemson in the conference title game. I don't believe they deserve to be in the playoff. That conference title game, to me, was their playoff game, in their chance to make the playoff with an automatic bid or lose and go home. And they ultimately lost and didn't look particularly good in that game until the end. So Alabama beat the number 2 ranked team in the country, number 2 seed Georgia. I believe Alabama should have been the playoff over SMU.
I'm going to hop in really quick, Fitz. I'm with you. I 100% agree with you that I think it should have been Alabama over SMU. I don't think that you should be rewarded by not playing a difficult strength of schedule and by not beating the best teams that you have played. But you say the word precedent. I'm getting real tired of the word precedent. And look, I've used it before too. And now the more and more I think about it, the more and more I think they're not setting a precedent. Like, this isn't the Supreme Court. This isn't a legal case. I don't think that precedent can be set when year over year, week over week, all the data points are different. Because next year, there's going to be a different field. There are going to be different teams with different best wins and different strength of schedules. There's different data points every single year. And also, it's a different freaking committee every single year. So I don't think that it's the committee making some massive statement by saying that if you're ranked in the top 12 going into a conference championship game and you lose that conference championship game, then you're going to get in no matter what, because the field is different every single year. I mean, look, Alabama lost to Oklahoma, lost to Vanderbilt. I still would have put Alabama in over SMU because they have the better wins. They've played the more competitive schedule, but I don't think that this is a quote unquote precedent, Fitz.
So look, this is my chance to take a victory lap, because I told you SMU was going to be in and SMU's in. But it's not about that for me. Like, when I watched it, to your point, Caroline, there's one thing I've asked every committee to be every year I've covered this thing, and that's consistent. So if you believe something week in and week out, believe it week in and week out. And the one thing I would say about this, the reason I thought this was so easy to see coming isn't frankly because I think SMU is better than Alabama. I honestly don't. I think you guys are right. I think Alabama is actually a better football team. But I want the committee to be consistent. Every single data point that they had a week ago about strength of schedule and who they played and frankly who they haven't played and the way they've looked, that all existed before Saturday. So before any of this existed on Saturday, they believed SMU wasn't just ahead. This wasn't like SMU's barely ahead of Alabama. This is SMU's in a total different debate. Remember, they debate these teams in groups of threes. So they debate 1 through 3, and then they debate 4 through 6. They come up with their votes. And then they recast a vote for 3v4. That's the way they do it. So then 7 through 9, and they revote 6v7. So all of these things. So I say that because SMU, 48 hours ago, was well ahead of Alabama. And I think if SMU in the mind of the committee was well ahead of Alabama, despite the fact that they had an easier strength of schedule, despite the fact that they hadn't gone through the gauntlet of the SEC, for all the things you talked about, those things still existed 48 hours ago. The committee can't just change their mind on conference championship weekend because of the outcome of that one game. It can't change all of your data points. So I think if this had been particularly close the whole way through, I could have seen making the change. Losing a close game in the ACC championship game when you were already not close to Alabama in the playoffs, I don't think that was going to change it. So I'm not taking a victory lap because I think the committee got it right. I'm taking a victory lap because I think the committee was consistent, and that's the only thing they can be every single year.
And I think that's 100% correct. But Nick Saban made a good point on the selection show, which is crazy, you know? Yeah. Winningest college football coach in the history of the sport makes a good point about the sport. But he said the issue isn't what the committee did today. The issue was the committee ranking SMU as high as they were ranked going into conference championship weekend. Because if the committee would have left SMU out, then yes, that would have been the message of quote unquote getting punished for playing in your conference championship game. But Saban's point was they shouldn't have even been that high in the first place with their strength of schedule, that it should have been more closely contested between SMU and the rest of the bubble teams because strength of schedule has always mattered. We can't just make it matter today.
Do that there? But how do we do that there and not do that to Indiana? Like, we're just like,
I think we should do that to Indiana. We should do that to Notre Dame. Should do that to Texas too.
If we take Indiana's game against Ohio State off, which is Indiana fans keep telling me, take that game out of it. It was an outlier. If we take that game out of it, Indiana's schedule is no better than Liberty's was last year. Like, we're holding SMU to this weird, like, their strength of schedule sucks. Okay, Indiana would like to have a word, and we're not questioning Indiana being in there. I think that's what's wild to me.
Yeah, I do think part of it is that Indiana's loss was to Ohio State and SMU's loss was to BYU. Two very different teams, even though BYU's had a good season, just not the same caliber as an Ohio State team. The one area to think about, and I'm not saying, I agree with you, Fitz, that it was tough for the committee to drop SMU out with where they were last week. But I just think about this for a second. When Penn State was named the 6th seed this afternoon, and everyone was waiting for the 11 seed to be revealed, who do you think every single Penn State fan, James Franklin and every single player wanted to have come in as the 11 seed playing Penn State? You think they wanted Alabama or you think they wanted SMU?
Hell no.
They wanted SMU, and it wasn't even close. Like, it wasn't even like and I know it doesn't matter, but I think just think about from who's the better team, the more deserving team to be in that spot. I think it's Alabama. Like, without a doubt. But isn't that
same? That's the same argument we made about USC and Sam Darnold's year. When they lost their first 3 games, Clay Helton, and by the end of the year, they were playing great. By the end of the year, we were all like, man, you don't want to play USC. And it's like, doesn't really matter. They lost 3 games. So, shame on them for losing 3 games. Like, I hear you, but that's the same argument we could make for South Carolina. And then, like, at some point, then is it really about winning your games, or is it about being the hottest team at the end of the season? And I don't think you're wrong. I think South Carolina on a neutral field, as we always say in the show, I think South Carolina and Alabama today would kick the snot out of SMU. I believe that. But at the same time, man, if we don't reward wins and losses, this gets even trickier. And there's no way to, like, the other part of this that we're not acknowledging is that these conferences choose not to play equal schedules. Like, they choose not to play the same number of conference games. They choose not to have the same depth. They choose to not invest the same way in college football. Like, there's no way to make a fair system because the ACC is never going to be able to be what the SEC is, and the SEC is not going to schedule the same as the Big Ten. Like, nobody's going to make these guys play together nice in the sandbox.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think it's tough looking at it. We're going to see that these non-conference schedules are easier and easier, and I've talked about on this show, like some of these rivalry games that fans want to see, coaches don't want to schedule because coaches know that they need to win games, not beat good teams, and that's what the committee showed us with SMU being in. Obviously, I also want to talk about, guys, about just this system of how we get to the 12 teams in the playoff. The fact that Oregon has one of the toughest paths now to the semifinals, to the national championship game as the number 1 seed, I think is flawed. They have a tougher path than probably any other of the 3 first-round bye teams in the playoff. And what it really comes down to me, the flaw in the system is that we are giving first-round byes to the top 4 conference champions. I'm good with conference champs getting an automatic bid to the playoffs. I think that's great. Give the top 5 ranked conference champs an automatic bid to be in the playoffs, so a team like Clemson gets in no matter what. But seed everyone 1 through 12. And the top 4 seeds should get a first-round bye. So teams like Arizona State and SMU and Clemson are the bottom few teams in the playoffs, despite the fact that Arizona State won the Big 12, despite the fact that Clemson won the ACC. They're not getting first-round byes. They're the bottom few teams. They have to go on the road in the first round, and you fix it by just seeding the teams the way that they're actually ranked for who gets the first round byes. So the top 4 teams in the country are getting the first round byes for week 1. I think that's the way you solve this issue, and then you don't have the issue of an Arizona State team who is a 12th-ranked team in the country getting a first-round bye, which throws off everything and gives a situation like Penn State is going to, if they win round 1 game, they go to play Boise State in round 2, who has a first-round bye for some reason.
If they win their round 1 game, they play SMU round 1 at home. They will win that game, and then they get rewarded with Boise State. That is a significantly easier path. And no disrespect to SMU or Boise State, that's a significantly easier path than Oregon. Or Ohio State, who has to play Tennessee and then play Oregon. Like that's the number 1 team in the country, the only undefeated team in the country. And you have to play Tennessee or Ohio State while Penn State gets SMU and Boise State. That's flawed.
This is the maddening thing about a sport that we all love. I don't believe that the people in charge of this entire process had the foresight that they should have had from the get-go. Because what you just described, Adam, where we don't give automatic seeds to conference champions, you're describing the NCAA men's basketball and women's basketball tournaments. Like, yes, you get an automatic bid if you win your tournament, but that doesn't mean that you suddenly get an automatic seed. Imagine if we had spent years sitting here saying, wait, you're automatically giving the ACC basketball champion a 1 seed? Like, that makes no sense. The system that could have been replicated already existed. How much do you have to bury your head in the sand to not see that if you're the people running the college football playoff system? You had a perfect example of what this should look like from another sport in your same area. Like there's another college sport that does this exactly the right way, and college football couldn't replicate that. I don't understand it. It just shows you that pride and money got in the way of so much of the consideration, and the ACC and the Big 12 wanting to not feel like they were being left on the side. Like, look, I'm big on the only fair way I think to do this, the only right way to do this from the outset was to have a committee vote on the top 12. And y'all, I don't give a damn if all 12 come from one conference. I don't care. If you're one of the top 12 teams, you go. But if we're going to start to give automatic bids, that's one thing. Automatic seeds disrupts this entire process for every single one of these teams. And that's not good for the future of the sport.
And if the system would have been in place this year where there's no automatic buys for the conference champs, they're just seeded as they are ranked, then we would have had Oregon, the number 1 team in the country, playing the winner of Indiana and Boise State in the 8-9 matchup. And that sounds more like it. That's the path the number 1 team in the country should have. Not having to play the winner of Oregon has to play the winner of Tennessee, Ohio State, then play Texas in the semifinal game, while Penn State, the number 6 seed, gets to play SMU round 1, then Boise State round 2. The thing that throws this whole thing off is the Boise State and the Arizona State first round byes. That throws off the entire seeding here and makes this whole thing funky.
Also, what's it going to look like, to your point? Because again, I'll go back to the men's and women's basketball tournaments. The number 1 seeds are prioritized 1-1-1-1, and then each of them is given a more favorable location and a more favorable bracket depending on where they're ranked. Like, again, precedent existed here. What's going to happen? Let's just say here, Penn State rolls through SMU, which I think we all believe is going to happen. And then what happens if Penn State takes on Boise State and beats them, just absolutely destroys Boise State in this process? Like, That's also not good. The team that sat there with the first round bye, just getting absolutely throttled by a big boy, is not a good look for the group of 5 in this process either. So, like, this is all of this playoff conversation will have a much different tone if a month we're sitting here talking about all of the blowouts we saw. Then people are going to say, is this really good? Do I really want to see more blowouts? Like, this season has to give us compelling playoff matchups. And I'm not sure from the look of this that they're going to be. I don't think Indiana Notre Dame is a compelling matchup. I think Notre Dame's going to boat race them. I think Penn State's going to boat race SMU. And we're going to end up, Texas is going to boat race Clemson. And I'm just looking around thinking, we're going to be sitting here on New Year's Day doing a show about blowouts in the college football playoff.
And I think that is so bad for the sport. And that was the concern going into an expanded playoff was, well, we already saw Alabama beat the doors off of Cincinnati in a 4-team playoff. Why do we need to open the door to more teams? I am very pro playoff expansion because I like more games that matter and more important games. But it's a bad look for the pro playoff expansionists whenever the exact concern of the anti-playoff expansionists comes to fruition. I don't think the problem is a bigger playoff. The problem is the seeding and the problem is the process. And to go back to the SMU Alabama argument, which I feel like we're going to be doing for the next month or so, like Alabama, Penn State, and State College.
Yeah, it would have been sweet.
Damn. Yeah. That would have been awesome. And I know that's not how the committee does it. Like the committee can't just sit around and think like, what do we want to watch? What would be really fun to just pop some popcorn and watch? They don't do it that way. But I feel like almost in a roundabout kind of holistic way, isn't that kind of show us who should have been in the playoff in the first place? That Alabama feels like it can contend for a national championship much more than SMU can?
I will say this. Some of these matchups are pretty sweet, though. I mean, I understand
Tennessee, Ohio State's awesome.
Yeah, I understand that the spreads on these games, I saw the opening lines. I think they're all touchdown plus spreads on these games. I mean, Texas is like a 10.5-point favorite. Penn State's an 8-point favorite in the opening line. But, I mean, Indiana Notre Dame is a sick matchup. In-state game. Those two teams will be great. They all know each other. Tennessee, Ohio State's awesome. Texas, Clemson's pretty cool. I mean, SMU, Penn State's the one that just makes no sense. And how about, the one thing we could have gotten right here, the one thing, is if you're going to have a first-round playoff game in Happy Valley, make it a game that's at 4 p.m. or 8 p.m. at night. Also, you had 3 chances out of the 4 games to give Penn State a night game. A game that would have been under the lights. You had Friday night, you got 4 p.m. on Saturday, 8 p.m. on Saturday, and Penn State freaking gets a noon kickoff on TNT. Are you kidding me? I mean, what is that? What are we doing? The one chance we have to get it right. Anyway, it'll still be a whiteout in Happy Valley, but to get a noon kick at Penn State, come on.
No, I'm with you. For anyone that hasn't seen the schedule, and this is important here. The first playoff game is Indiana Notre Dame at 8 p.m. Okay, that's on Friday the 20th. Saturday, we get a triple header. Saturday, we get SMU Penn State at noon, Clemson, Texas at 4, and then Tennessee, Ohio State at 8. They didn't give Penn State the advantage they could have had with that game being at night, frankly. They didn't give them some of the home field advantage they could have had. And I think they absolutely just screwed Tennessee, putting them in Ohio State at night. On that game, like that is going to be freezing cold for Tennessee. Unless there's some unseasonable luck happening, Tennessee's going to be freezing their you-know-what's off, trying to figure out how to play the horseshoe. Like, that is an unenviable position. For the life of me, I can't understand. And the NFL does the same thing. I understand its ratings, but I cannot understand why Clemson, Texas, the one game that's most likely to have at least decent temps, wasn't put at night, so that then at least you give yourself the opportunity to have, that. I would have put Tennessee, Ohio State at noon, gives them the best shot at weather that works. Penn State, SMU in the afternoon can give the team with the higher ranking a great advantage, and then put Clemson, Texas at night, because that's the best weather that gives you the opportunity for a right football game.
I mean, the committee was probably like, let's take the team with a quarterback from California and a running back that has carried the team this entire season from southern Louisiana. Let's put them in literal Siberia at night, where it will be no warmer than about 10 degrees, and there's probably going to be ice on the field. The team that was boohoo whining about the seat heaters being broken in 55-degree weather in Athens. Let's do that. Do not envy that in the slightest. But also Penn State SMU on TNT. Like, was Nick Jr. taken? Seriously?
TNT has the playoff. TNT paid for some playoff games, so they get. I think they get almost all of them, don't they? Like, TNT. Oh, the TNT gets two of the first round games. So ABC gets 2, TNT gets 2. So if you're TNT, you'll take.
Is Friday night TNT?
Looking at it now, Friday night is ABC. Saturday noon is TNT. Saturday 4 p.m. is TNT, and then Saturday night is ABC. So ABC gets the 2 night games. ABC, ESPN simulcast, and then TNT and Max will simulcast the afternoon games on Saturday.
Love it.
Love it.
Let's go TNT. Come on.
Yeah, come on. Yeah.
TNT.
It's people that love working in college football. Give me more networks. More networks.
No doubt.
All right, quick break. Coming up next, we'll continue to get into our reactions from the 12-team playoff rankings. I think we can all agree. We all have issues with the seeding, with the automatic bid. So just to kind of refresh, first round of the playoffs, Oregon, Georgia, Boise State, and Arizona State, they will all get a first round bye. Clemson will go to Austin to take on Texas. Tennessee will go to Columbus to take on Ohio State. SMU goes to Penn State, and Indiana goes to Notre Dame. The winner of Clemson, Texas will play Arizona State in the Peach Bowl. The winner of Tennessee, Ohio State goes to the Rose Bowl to take on Oregon. SMU, Penn State will go to the Fiesta Bowl to take on Boise State. Indiana, Notre Dame winner will go to the Sugar Bowl to take on Georgia. Who has the best path to a national championship, Adam? Not necessarily who you think is going to win the national championship, but as of today, who has the easiest draw?
Yeah, Penn State was the winner of Selection Day with their draw to the semifinals. Penn State has the easiest path. They're going to be 8.5-point favorites, maybe 9-point favorites against SMU in the first round in Happy Valley. Penn State's very thankful right now that is an SMU team they're playing, not Alabama in the first round. And then if Penn State wins that game, which they should, quarterfinal game in the Fiesta Bowl, they'll be 2 touchdown favorites, maybe 10-point to 2 touchdown favorites against Boise State in the quarterfinals. So Penn State has to beat SMU and Boise State to make the semifinal playoff game. I mean, that is a picture-perfect path for James Franklin and for Penn State. Now, what that means is there's a lot of pressure. And Penn State has lost 2 big games this year to Ohio State and to Oregon. Looked pretty good in the Oregon game, but the pressure is on. Penn State has to win these 2 games. If you're James Franklin, if you're Drew Aller, you cannot lose to SMU round 1 at home, and you certainly then can't lose to Boise State, a group of 5 team, in the second round. So having the easiest path also comes with a whole new amount of pressure on Penn State to win their 2 biggest games and maybe the last couple decades of Penn State football. These are must-win games for Penn State now, Fitz.
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, I agree that it ramps up the pressure. And looking at the grid, I agree Penn State has the easiest path. Frankly, this Penn State, SMU, Boise little collective there for all 3 of those teams, life looks a lot different than it does if we're just looking at these teams in their groupings. I mean, Tennessee, Ohio State, and Oregon are all grouped together in one little branch. Like, my God, if we were seeding today, if we were just saying how do things look in the college football world and nobody had automatic bids for anything, and you look at where this is going, you have incredibly, I know Tennessee's had their moments this year, but Ohio State, certainly, if I'm Oregon, I don't want to take on either Tennessee or Ohio State if I can avoid it, right? Like if I'm Dan Lanning, I'm sitting there saying, now the only thing is at least you're in the Rose Bowl, so everybody's got to travel west. Maybe there's a little bit of love to that. But man, that Tennessee, Ohio State, Oregon situation seems pretty brutal. And if you're Arizona State, man, I mean, you're sitting back saying, hey, we think we can beat Clemson and Texas. I mean, now I thought a few days ago Texas had a shot at the number 1 team, being the number 1 team of the country if they could make a statement. They made a statement that they ain't ready to be the number 1 team of the country. So even Arizona State's got to be looking around saying, you know what? I mean, we can run on anybody. We like the way this offense looks against anybody. Like I would make the argument that Arizona State feels better about what they'd be getting against Texas than Georgia feels about what they'd be getting against Notre Dame. I know Notre Dame has the most inexcusable loss in the country all year. But, man, if I'm Georgia and Notre Dame, I'm sitting around saying I don't want any of that smoke if I'm Georgia.
No, 100%. And I think it's obvious. Penn State has the easiest path. I think honorable mention is Texas. And I say that with, an asterisk of, Clemson at times can look like a solid team. I'm not going to by any chance say a national championship contender because I don't think I've seen Clemson look like a national championship contender. But at times they can look like the kind of team that can beat anybody. And Texas at times looks like the kind of team that can lose to anybody. So I live in Tennessee, right? I'm around Tennessee fans all the time. My parents graduated from Tennessee. My entire family graduated from Tennessee. I hear it constantly. that everybody hates the Vols, that Tennessee always has the worst luck of nobody likes us. And it always drives me crazy because it's like, it's not about Tennessee, people not liking Tennessee. It's not about it. But I do have to say, Tennessee got screwed. Tennessee got screwed. And that whole little bunch of Tennessee, Ohio State, Oregon, like that is the least favorable path. But Tennessee beat an Alabama team that there was a very strong argument for them to be in the college football playoff. They also played Georgia on the road. Like, look, Tennessee didn't have, an absolute gauntlet of a schedule, but they also didn't have an easy schedule. And they also have some pretty solid wins. So they are rewarded with a trip to Ohio State at night when it's going to be absolutely freaking freezing. And then if they win that game, by the grace of God, they will go all the way to the West Coast across, 3 different time zones to take on the only team in college football that is undefeated. That feels like a total slap in the face to me.
Let me change one word, though. Tennessee got unlucky. Because you're right. I spent a lot of time in Nashville, as everybody knows. And one of my best friends, RIP, had a checkerboard on his calf tattoo, right? Like it was every Saturday. He woke up when we were on the road and screamed, "Go Vols!" Like I've lived, eaten, and breathed Vols fans. And what Vols fans refuse to understand sometimes is that nationally, if you just go to every other market, most people don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other on Tennessee. They're like, "Yeah, Tennessee's fine." They don't really care. They don't really care. Vols fans hate to hear that. Here's what happened, though. Ohio State lost a game they never should have lost. And that changed all of this. Like, this was never supposed to be Ohio State in this slot. If Ohio State doesn't lose to Michigan, this entire playoff picture is wildly different. Tennessee, because they got in their own way with penalties, because they didn't play clean enough offensively at times, and because their defense wasn't as good as it needed to be in the last portion of the year, has been hovering around the 8-9 spot every week we've been talking about this. They just got unlucky that the other team hovering in that 8-9 seed suddenly became arguably the second best team in the country for the majority of the year because that team decided not to show up against Michigan. Like, the ripple effects of Ohio State losing to Michigan have impacted Penn State. They've impacted Oregon. They've impacted Tennessee at this point. Like, the whole playoff looks different because of that one thing.
And you know what's funny, Fitz? On top of all that, the thing that tells you this whole system's flawed is just the 3 of the 4 teams that got first round byes have their quarterfinal games. They may be underdogs in. I mean, Arizona State's going to be a big underdog to Texas. Maybe not big, but maybe the 7-point underdog. I mean, Oregon, Ohio State on a neutral site, I think that's going to be a pick-em game. I don't know. I don't know if Oregon will be favored in that game, or if they are, it's not going to be by much. Boise State is going to be a big underdog to Penn State. Just the fact that we gave 3 first-round byes to those teams, Oregon, makes sense, but Arizona State, Boise State, I'm talking about more so, that they're going to be underdogs in these quarterfinal games. So I'd say those 3 teams have the worst path to the semifinals because they got to play really tough games despite their first-round bye, where some of these other teams have a much easier path. Texas has a path. I mean, Texas got to beat Arizona State. They're got to beat Clemson and beat Arizona State. I mean, that's a pretty good path if you're a Texas fan. I mean, this whole thing is so flawed in these matchups, but it does make it pretty entertaining.
Also, by the way, we're just presuming as we sit, and we don't know, like, what's Carson Beck going to look like? Last time we saw Carson Beck, he had a dead arm handed off for a game-winning touchdown for Georgia. Like, if Georgia has no starting quarterback against Notre Dame, they're going to be an underdog also. Like, that is, it's just, and there was a lot of conversation.
They may be 4 for 4 underdogs.
Yeah. It's wild.
These paths and the fact that it's so disadvantageous for some of the best teams in the country, I don't think that that's an indictment on the College Football Playoff Committee. Like, Ward Manuel talked about that in the selection show, about how we have to rank these teams the way that we see fit. We can't think about path. We can't think about, Oregon, are they going to have an easy enough, quote unquote, path because they've earned it in the regular season? You just have to rank teams how you see fit. This is an indictment of the system. I see so much outrage on social media about how the playoff committee got it wrong because of all of these paths. No, that's the playoffs problem, not the committee's problem.
And I will loudly scream this. I hope fans will actually listen to it. Fans never want to believe this. Again, I hosted the Rankings Reaction Show on ESPN for 6 years digitally. There was never a time that they came into anybody and said, pick these teams. There was never a time that they came in and said, we really need this conference. There was never a time that they came in and said, we really want these matchups. Like, people want to believe this whole thing is rigged and fixed by a committee that's sitting there with an evil Simpsons-like laugh as they try and find the right matchups to screw certain teams or to get TV ratings. The reality of it is, y'all are going to watch no matter what happens, right? The committee really, truly does just sit there and argue about 1 through 3, 4 through 7. Like, it's the whole process. Yeah. They don't sit there and think, oh, what we really need. And proof positive, if the committee really cared about ratings, they'd have given you Alabama, right? If the committee really cared about stirring up drama, Alabama would be in this thing. They would have taken us into the last weekend with Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina all having a shot. The committee is doing the unenviable job of trying to figure out who's going to make the college football playoff, which is already enough of a task. They ain't worried about anything else. They know that we are all suckers enough. We will watch it no matter what the matchups are. Like on New Year's Eve, when nobody else cares about whoever Boise State's playing in the college football playoff, Adam Breneman is going to be sitting on that sideline watching Penn State. He's going to say, you know what? I don't need to make out with anybody at midnight. I don't need a kiss. I don't need to watch the ball drop. I need New Year's Eve football.
I need a win.
That's what college football heads are going to do. The committee doesn't have to job any of this because they know that we're all sick enough that we will watch every ounce of it.
There's two types of people on New Year's Eve. The kind of people that are dancing and celebrating and shouting and the couple making out in the corner. And then the other types of people are the ones like glued to their phones. Like, is Ohio State going to make this last second field goal against Georgia? Or are they going to miss it?
Yeah.
And those are the kind of sickos that we are.
I'll just be honest. Like, this is peek behind the curtain in the music business. My favorite New Year's Eve I've ever had in my life, because I've always either covered college football every year, or I was in music. We always played. When we played Dick Clark's New Year's Eve show with the band, humble brag, the funny thing is we were part of the LA set. And so like on the LA set, people don't know this, the LA portion of it is taped a month in advance. So you go out and they have like a whole audience there and they do the whole like, we're proud. Everybody's like screaming and yelling. They pretend basically it's New Year's Eve. The LA portion, when you're watching Dick Clark, is all pre-taped. So you have to pre-tape it if you're on the LA set, but that means you can't work New Year's Eve because they don't want the whole world to figure that out. So the beautiful thing is I got to sit at home and watch TV. I watched myself on TV. Best New Year's Eve ever had. Didn't have to deal with the crowd. Didn't have to deal with any pressure. Didn't have to deal with the date. No, I just sat at home and watched TV on New Year's Eve, which is exactly what I'm going to do this year for Penn State, Boise State at that point.
That's the way to do it. I'm not waiting in a long line in 22-degree weather and heels and I'm uncomfortable. And no, I don't want to do that. I want to watch college football. And that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Listen, if Penn State beats SMU round 1, I will be in Scottsdale, Arizona for the Penn State-Boise State game on New Year's Eve. I'm not sure I'll be doing the show on New Year's Eve with you guys if I'm at that game.
Wait. What if we all go out to Scottsdale? What if we all go to Arizona?
We can do it live in person.
We could do that.
I mean, look, I'm just throwing this out here. Like the Golics are like a second family to me. They all live in Arizona. Well, I say we just crash the Golics house, set up a bunch of cameras, and we'll just set up cameras and do it from their living room. They won't mind.
College Football Power Hour live from Bottle Blonde in Scottsdale. All right, thank you.
Live from Riot House and High Five. We can do a tour around the Scottsdale clubs.
Special guest, the Bottle Girls that are bringing things over with a big light up sign that says College Football Power Hour.
I'm going out to the club. Let's go.
To the clubs. Out to the clubs. All right, quick break now. Coming up next. The big question, the big predictions, who's winning the national championship. So we already know that there are teams that have easier or more difficult paths. Despite all of that, just based off of matchups, based off of travel, home versus away, and what we know about these teams. Fitz, your prediction today on Sunday, December 8th, who is winning the national championship?
I mean, when the season started, I predicted that Oregon would be our national champion. And right now, I think what we saw over the course of the weekend, and look, we said it on last night's show. Go back and listen to last night's show. I was jarred by the inability for Oregon to stop the run. And I am wildly concerned about what that means for their first round matchup, because they're either going to be taking on 2 great backs in Ohio State, or they're going to be taking on 1 great back with Tennessee. Either way, those teams can run on Oregon. I think Penn State just gave everybody a blueprint, but I need a quarterback I can trust. that can get in a shootout and win a bunch of games. And Dylan Gabriel has been absolutely that. So I think, frankly, as much as we make this about everything else, Dan Lanning, we know we'll have his boys ready to play. We know that Dylan Gabriel can limit his mistakes. We know that Oregon can absolutely make you pay for every single thing that you miscommunicate in the back end of a defense. I'm still looking at all of these passes. I don't trust Georgia to bring it consistently. I don't trust Boise State, obviously, or SMU. I don't think that that's really a question. I no longer trust Texas. So this really becomes about Oregon or Penn State, and we just saw how that game played out. So I'm taking Oregon to win the national championship.
I like it, Fitz, and I like Oregon as well, but I got to be a little creative here, and I'm
like
going to
this.
not pick the number 1 overall seed, okay? My first
Is that a jab
round...
at Fitz?
No, it's not a jab.
Yeah.
It's listen. If I was betting $1,000 on it right now, I would bet on Oregon. Let me just put that there. Yeah. But if you take Oregon out of it, because I believe in Dylan Gabriel, I think the experience he has at quarterback will make a difference down the stretch and how he avoids making mistakes, and that like he's the best quarterback that's playing right now in the college football playoff. But the team that I think is a contender in this whole thing that people aren't talking about is Ohio State. Ohio State there's a reason Ohio State has the 4th best odds still to win the national championship right now. And the Buckeyes got a tough draw against Tennessee round 1 and then Oregon round 2. But this is a type of team that has the talent to absolutely be a contender. I mean, Ohio State's a 7.5-point favorite at home against Tennessee. It's going to be a night game. You mentioned it, Carolina freezing there. So that one's going to be an Ohio State win. And then Ohio State against Oregon, I think Ohio State's favorite in that game, despite losing to them in the regular season. So you think about the Ohio State-Oregon Rose Bowl, should they beat Tennessee, and it's gonna come down to that. After that, Ohio State's path is pretty good. And then Ohio State can get hot at any moment on offense. I mean, they're the number 1 scoring offense in the country, number 1 in total defense in the country. They're top 10 in about every other statistical category in the country. They still likely have the most talented and deepest roster in the country, aside from their offensive line losing those 2 starters. But I think Ohio State losing their offensive line when they did is a blessing in disguise. They got exposed and against Michigan, and then now they can make the adjustments they need to going into the playoff. Let's not forget the first year of the 14 playoff, Ohio State made that epic run after losing their quarterback. Cardell Jones comes in. They end up beating Alabama, then beat Oregon to win the first college football playoff. This is a team that's talented enough to win the first 12-team college football playoff as well. I think Ohio State's a real contender in this thing.
Before we get your pick, let me run us through a quick exercise. And by the way, I love that pick by you, Adam. I'm going to say the team, and you tell me if you trust, like right now, if you had to make a large bet trust their quarterback, not everything else. Just do you trust their quarterback position? Clemson, yes or no? Adam?
Yes, I trust Kate Klubnik.
No.
Caroline?
No.
I don't trust. I don't trust Kate Klubnik. Yeah. I'm out. Quinn Ewers?
You guys are Kate Klubnik haters. You've been all season long. Kate Klubnik
haters. That's fine.
Okay.
I'll print the T-shirts.
All right, I've created an argument now. Quinn Ewers? Do you trust Quinn?
Yes, I trust Quinn Ewers.
I trust Quinn Ewers because Steve Sarkisian is his head coach.
Now we're talking about a playoff matchup. You trust Nico? I mean, I don't think we have any right. And then, do we really trust Will Howard to go in and win a national championship? Like, I got to put my trust in Will. I'm biasing this question.
Listen, if you notice in my Ohio State take there, I didn't mention Will Howard as one of the reasons that they're going to win the playoff.
Right. Look, Jennings has been very good for SMU, but do we trust Jennings to go in and win a national championship?
No.
Exactly. Drew Aller, do we trust Drew Aller to be able to win an Natty?
Yes.
Adam.
That was a quick yes, wasn't it? No,
Adam.
Hold on. For real. Drew Aller's probably the third best quarterback in the playoff right now. I mean, the way he's played, he played well. He played well against Oregon, threw a bad interception, but he managed that game really well, and he's going to be a first-round draft pick.
Game on the line. Let's say Penn State has the ball at their own 10. There's a minute left on the clock. Penn State's down 6. Both Katron Allen and Nick Singleton are out. Drew Aller has to drive 90 yards to win a football game. Let's say a trip to the national championship is on the line. I don't know how great I would feel if I was a Penn State fan or somebody that put money on Penn State.
I'd feel good. Hell, let's think about this for a second. Penn State, Oregon, Penn State down 2 scores. Drew Aller takes Penn State down the field, a 4th down and 10 play, delivers a strike for a touchdown. Think about Penn State.
That was a great play.
Think about Penn State USC. Drew Aller gotta have it situation. Penn State loses that game to USC. We're not even talking about Penn State in the playoff right now. And Drew Aller, in the biggest moment, led this team down the field to score a touchdown and then converted 2 4th downs on their field goal game-winning drive. So, or their drive to take it to overtime, excuse me. So I think Drew Aller is probably the best part, the second best part of this Penn State offense after Tyler Warren. I mean, K. Trial and Nick Singleton have been okay this season, really good against Oregon, but the run game hasn't been perfect. Then there's no receivers for Drew Aller. So I don't think he's the issue. I trust Drew Aller. I really do. It's the receivers for Penn State I would struggle with.
I sort of trust him. You know what I mean? Like that. Like, I know this is a cop-out answer, but I'm like, I don't feel like if I had to bet my house on Drew Aller to not screw up I wouldn't bet the house. Like that's my line here. Like I wouldn't bet my house. Like look, as much as I love the way Rourke has played this year for Indiana, we bet in our house that Rourke is going to be the guy that you can trust to win you a national championship. I'm not.
No.
Yeah.
All right. And so then that gets us to Riley Leonard. I only bring this up because, look, my point here is there are very few. Look, we could talk about Levitt and we could talk about Maddox and the top 4. But when you look at the matchups we're going to get weekend 1, I trust Quinn Ewers. I don't really trust anybody else other than maybe Riley Leonard. So I'm saying out of the 8 teams, for me, there are only 2 quarterbacks that I look at and be like, yeah, I absolutely trust. One is in Texas and the other's with Notre Dame. And the rest of them, I just don't feel great about. Playoff matchup, oh my God, everything's gone wrong. The best of Nico can win a national championship, but I have no idea if he can bring the best. None. So my point on this is that for all of these 12-team expansion, we don't have a lot of quarterbacks that I can plant the flag on. All the more reason that I am in on Oregon to win a national championship, because when I don't have very many quarterbacks that I look at and say, I'd bet my house on that guy, I'm going to take the team to win it all that I would bet my house on. And that in this whole situation, if we include everybody, is Dylan Gabriel. The rest of them, I'm like, I might bet on Quinn Ewers. I might bet on Riley Leonard, but boy, I'm puckered up all day if I do.
And I think that that's a statement that we can apply to really all of college football. How many quarterbacks right now, in the playoff or not in the playoff, do you trust with the game on the line? Cam Ward is the only quarterback outside of this field that comes to mind for me. He's not the reason that Miami's on the outside looking in. It's Miami's defense is the reason they're not in the playoff. But other than Cam Ward, who's a guy that really sticks out that we haven't touched on in all of college football that you say, I want that guy. I trust that guy.
And with that being said, that's why I said on Inside Coverage, by the way, if you guys don't listen to Inside Coverage, you should. Great NFL show. I said on Inside Coverage the other day that NFL teams have to be wildly bummed that they didn't get Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders in this college football playoff, because they want the data point of seeing what a playoff matchup looks like for a guy that they're thinking of drafting to play on Sundays. And frankly, I had 2 different people that cover the sport at the highest possible level for the draft text me and say, best take. People should be talking more about it. That's a great point, Caroline, is that no Cam Ward, no Shedeur Sanders. There just isn't a lot to trust in this quarterback. Now that we've gone through that exercise, Caroline, who are you taking to win it all?
Oregon and Ohio State are not bad bets in the slightest. I think if you put your money on either of them today, you feel really good about it. But for the sake of being different and just bring up a different team, I'll say Texas. And for a few reasons. And I know that's wild after what we saw Texas do against Georgia in the SEC championship game, and how when Georgia has played a national title contender caliber team twice this year, they have played their worst football of the season. That was earlier in the year against Georgia, and then in Atlanta in the SEC championship against Georgia. But what I like about Texas, first and foremost, it's the path. They get Clemson in the first round. That's a Clemson team that if Miami didn't poop the bed against Syracuse, then Clemson wouldn't have even been in this position. And then they go on to play Arizona State, a very good team, a team that I wouldn't want to play right now, but still not a team that I think any of us view right now as a clear-cut national title contender. So it's those 2 teams that they would take on in the first 2 rounds, and travel. I think that's a big element here too. Texas gets to play in Austin round 1. Then the second game that they would play, assuming that they play Clemson, is in Atlanta. Austin to Atlanta, that's not the craziest trip. That's 1 time zone from Central Time to Eastern Time. That's still kind of in your geographical footprint. It's no Tennessee having to go to the Rose Bowl. The other reason why I like Texas is because I think there's one thing that is more important in college football than it ever has been, and harder to come by in today's college football, but it's something that Texas has, and that's depth. that Texas has like 5 or 6 receivers that you really trust. Texas has 2 starting caliber running backs in Trey Wisner and Jaden Blue. And Texas has 2 quarterbacks that they trust with Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning. Can Arch Manning get Texas to a national championship? I don't know. But if Quinn Ewers gets a little bit banged up, I think that Sark can feel really good about what Arch Manning can do, whether it's taking care of the football or creating big plays with his legs, whatever it might be, and the coaching aspect of it all. I trust Sark. I trust the kind of coach that Sark is. I trust that Sark has a good feeling for the vibe for the game. He knows his team and their defense. Defense wins championships. It's an old adage, but it's also kind of true that even though Texas's defense did not step up in the biggest moments against Georgia, we've seen Texas's defense carry them for the entirety of the season. So I like Texas's path. I like Texas's depth. And I just feel like I can trust Texas. And I look at Ohio State and Oregon, and they clearly have the more difficult path that has to come back and bite them at some point in this entire tournament.
And Texas was really one throw, one run, one jumping on the fumble away from winning the SEC championship game. I mean, that could have gone either way the entire time. One missed field goal, correct? Yeah. I mean, so many different things could have played out. Texas played better in that game than Georgia did, and then it fell off in the second half. So I'm with you. I think Texas is a team that people are writing off, but have a pretty good path.
Arizona State's run defense is good. And Arizona State's run defense can handle this, I think. The other part of this, guys, I really think we're sleeping on Notre Dame. And I know Notre Dame loses in the playoff, but man, they got an Indiana team that I think they handle, and then they're going to get a Georgia team that might be with a backup quarterback. And even if they're not with a backup quarterback, this is still a Georgia team that led the nation in dropped passes. This is a Georgia team that at times is irresponsible. This is a Georgia team that shoots itself in the foot over and over and over again. I'm looking at Notre Dame thinking, I think they're going to run through Indiana pretty easily. I think they beat Georgia. This is a Notre Dame team that I think has a real shot at playing for the national championship game.
For the record, I'm taking Ohio State Notre Dame in the national championship game. That's my prediction as we sit right now.
I will take Oregon Notre Dame.
So I like Notre Dame. If you had to ask me who's the first round pretender and then who's my second contender, I would say pretender Indiana, contender Notre Dame. I mean, I think this is going to be a one and done. Great season, Kirk Cinetti. I get your plea for a first round playoff game, but this thing's one and done. I'm not saying it's going to be a blowout, but ultimately when this game goes final, Notre Dame will be too much for Indiana to go beat. And
I think if you're an Indiana fan, you could live with that. Like just being here, I think is exciting
just
for Indiana
for
fans.
Ride. Just happy to be here.
I'm just happy to be here. Just doing it for the memes. I'll take Texas, Ohio State in the national championship game. We're all picking from the top of the bracket. I don't know what the betting markets look like. What team would you be most surprised to win the national championship?
Of the actual viable contenders, because I
who do we view as a non-viable contender?
I don't think Indiana has any shot in this thing. I don't think SMU has any shot in this thing.
I'd say Georgia.
Boise?
I don't think Clemson. I don't think Boise has a shot. I don't think Clemson has a shot. I think the team that would surprise me, but not surprise me, would be Tennessee. Because if you look at Tennessee at their best this year, and I know we talk about this every week, at your best is a variable. But if you look at Tennessee at their best, like if Nico gets hot, and we know that they can run the football on anybody, we know that defense has played really well. If they limit their turnovers and penalties, which, is a big if they do that, I mean, Tennessee can play with anybody on any given Saturday.
Yeah, I'm taking my team that would surprise me is Georgia. I think Georgia winning the national title would surprise me. They got to play Notre Dame in that quarterfinal game. Georgia with Carson Beck hurt. The lack of consistency from this team throughout the entire season. I know they're the second seed, number 2 ranked team in the country, SEC champions. Doesn't feel like it to me when I watch this Georgia team play.
I think it would probably be Arizona State for me, which is wild because they're getting a first round bye. But I look at Arizona State's path. If they have to play Texas, like that's a really good Texas team. That's a very complete Texas team. I don't think Arizona State has played a single team that is the caliber of Texas, but the path gets significantly easier, I think, if Clemson somehow finds a way to pull it out against Texas. So Arizona State would be up there for me. And that's absolutely zero disrespect to what Kenny Dillingham has done with this team, to Cam Scadaboo and Sam Lovett, that I think they're explosive playmakers, but just given the path and given the field, it would surprise me. But also, I'm not counting it out. crazier things have happened in college football this season. All right, that is going to do it for us today. What a fun day. What a fun little, what a playoff that we got ahead of ourselves. We will be here with a full reaction to every single playoff game. So we're still here every Tuesday and every Saturday with our reactions to all of the action on Saturday night. We'll be here with full previews for all of these playoff games. We got you covered here right on the College Football Power Hour, on your preferred podcast platform, on the Yahoo Sports YouTube page, sports.yahoo.com. You can also check out all of our thoughts and commentary throughout the week on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Adam Breneman 81, at Jason Fitz, and I'm at Caroline Fenton 1. So always appreciate y'all for stopping by the podcast. Like it, subscribe, review it, tell a friend, tell the people that you hate, tell kickers, tell everybody about it. We'll be back on Tuesday night with an even more in-depth preview of all of these first round playoff matchups. We are out.